Thanks for joining us tonight. I'll do some brief introductions and then we'll dive into the presentation. So I'm Laura Solomon in partnership with my husband, Perry, who's sitting back there. We own Tybee Oyster Company. And as part of Tybee Oyster Company, we also incorporated a nonprofit called ECO, which stands for Education, Community, and Oysters. And we'll talk a lot more about the mission of that as we go through the presentation. With me today, I have Anna, who is ECO's program coordinator, and she's also assistant farm manager for Tybee Oysters. So she wears two hats, works on the farm a couple days a week, and then also goes into schools and does programming. And I'm going to give them each a little opportunity to introduce themselves as well. And this is Alyssa. She is our first ever intern. And that is, she's a student at Savannah State. And this internship is funded by the Berkey-Hanen Foundation, which is a foundation based in Athens, in honor of a student who is studying marine biology and coastal ecology, who passed away. And so this is a way to shepherd his work forward on the coast. So we're really honored to have that, to be able to extend our mission. Just a brief background. So neither Perry nor I got into this industry as farmers or even fishermen. We both met at Georgia Tech, have undergrad engineering degrees, both have 20-year careers behind us, and really see this as a passion project to focus on building up our coastline, as well as proving that we can have an effective working waterfront, bringing fresh seafood back to our state. It's a big source of pride for us. So Anna, I'll turn it over to you.
My name is Anna, and I moved here about 2.5 years ago, coming in August. I moved here to be an environmental educator on Tybee Island at the 4-H center there. Fell in love with the coast and wanted to stay longer. Learned a lot about oysters and their important role in the habitat. I didn't like eating them at first. And I was doing a part-time job trying to make it work, and then I met Katie Holiday, who was on our board, and she was talking about her cool friend who owns an oyster farm. So then I got plugged in with them. And around the same time, they started the nonprofit in July of 2024. So then I kind of naturally fit in with that. Got to go out the farm with them. They also needed help with that. So they do 3 days a week on the farm, and then roughly 2 days a week on the nonprofit, doing programming with schools.
Hey everyone, as they introduced, my name is Alyssa. I'm a college student over at Savannah State. I'm actually a senior. This was the start of my senior year. And so I get to intern with them, going out to schools and stuff with ECO, as we'll talk about later. I live 4 hours away normally outside of college, and I got into wanting to conservation and rehab, and that kind of led me to applying to their internship and being able to intern with them since January. And I'm very happy to be here and hope you guys learn about everything.
And what's your major?
Marine sciences.
Awesome. So that first picture was kind of a flat view. It's fine. And this is an aerial view using a drone shot. When we had 4 lines in the water, we now, I know, it's a little baby farm. We now have 11, and at max capacity, our farm can hold between 20 and 25 lines. So we're slowly expanding. We've been doing it really intentionally as we build demand and are able to. We're a family farm, as we established, with a few employees. Given our kind of non-traditional background in this industry, we lean really heavily into culture, and we think that's very important. So we want everyone on our team to be bought into the mission, and they are all fantastic stewards of the Georgia coast. We are located in the Bull River, line of sight to the Wausau Sound, so you can see the ocean from our lease. We're located between Savannah and Tybee, which means, as you can see in this picture, we have pristine water because our marsh is a fabulous filter. So it's about 5 miles from any human-touched land, and the marsh filters it as it comes out. So salt bombs are super clean, and we really focus on sustainability, quality, consistency, and traceability. And we'll talk more a little bit about how we're always aiming to take it from sustainability to regenerative. And just something I put in text because I never want to forget to say it, that we have been just continuously humbled by things like this and the enthusiasm and energy around this new industry in the state. Georgia has a rich history when it comes to oysters, from 5,000 years ago, the indigenous population, to slave culture, and the early 1900s, it was led the industry in harvest of the nation, which is huge because we have, as we know, we're all here 100 miles of coast. And our tiny coastline led the nation in oyster harvest by pounds of meat. So, you know, coming full circle back to where we were, we had kind of a decimated wild industry, last in the country to legalize, for lack of a better word, that just means create a regulatory framework for floating mariculture. So it's been really cool. We were lucky to be the first ones on, you know, the water, but it's been quite an experience, and mostly because of everyone's enthusiasm about it. So a little bit more about that and the process. We are a floating subtidal lease, so we actually lease the bottom, even though all of our gear is apparently on the top. It is anchored to the seabed. We basically work like a plant nursery. So we get the oyster, the spat, when it's tiny, 2 millimeters. You can see in this picture, it looks like quinoa. It's just tiny. A lot of people see them and say they're cute, but I guess it's just because the small version of anything is cute. So we buy the seed, and then our job is really just to nurture it up until it's market size, which for our oysters is 2 inches. The farm ones is 2 inches. It is a no input system. So that just means we don't feed them, we don't fertilize them, we don't do anything other than put them in the baskets and manage their water flow. They eat whatever is in the water that flows through their baskets. And since they sit in the top column here and they stay submerged more than a wild oyster would, they don't, you know, get dry with the tides. They continuously feed too. So they do tend to grow a little bit faster. And the growing system also impacts the shape of their shell, the thickness, the easeability to shuck them because they are thicker. Oh yeah, thank you. And then they do provide artificial habitat protection. So as Anna will talk a little bit more in the eco side of things, oyster reefs are a great habitat creator for a ton of species on the eastern seaboard. And we actually serve in kind of an artificial capacity in that way. We buy seed primarily from the UGA Marine Extension, which is generated from wild broodstock that they get off the Georgia coast. We do diversify and have some seed that comes in from Virginia.
Does that predetermine the result that you get?
The type of seed? We're actually fairly new still, so we're continuing to collect data on that. Though the wild Georgia seed does really well here because it's native here. But it does allow us to just have a little bit of diversity in case there is something that impacts them. We think it's good to, you know, protect against those things.
It's all the same species. They're all eastern oysters up along the east coast. So same species, just different habitat, different physical characteristics.
You can only import Cross Austria virginica. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, very nice. That species, the eastern oyster, is the only species you can import into the state. Yeah, there are states that have different regulations, like some states allow you to import other species of oysters as well. But yeah, and here's another look at that process. So this is in a little mesh bag. These seed are right at 2 millimeters. This is some we got last year that we were putting into our nursery. So we have 2 different ways to nurse seed. This is a mesh bag that is actually, you can see, is inserted into this basket here. So this is an on-the-farm system. And then we now are in our 2nd season of having a floating upweller system that sits at the Savannah Boathouse, and all of our seed stays there until it's big enough to go out to the farm. That's a little bit more economical, efficient, and sustainable because you don't have to go out in a boat to check on it all the time. You can just pop over and take care of it. And then obviously the final end is beautifully shucked oysters.
It usually takes about a year to get there on average, from the baby to the...
To the point earlier, you can see a lot of fluctuation here in the Georgia oyster industry. The navy line is pounds and the gray line is dollars. So you can start to see if you data and economics like I do, supply and demand, how that affects the pricing. This only starts in 1950, so you can imagine where it was, back in 1908. But it is an industry that needs investing in, as you can see from the demise over the years. Here's an overview of the state and where it currently exists in terms of floating oyster farms. There are, actually, I think this number is closer to 40 now, intertidal leases. So intertidal are the wild harvest zones. You can't see them in these pictures. These are all floating, but basically it would be like a big marsh area where you can wild harvest legally for commercial sales in the intertidal zone. And then the floating, there are 9 designated leases that all have leaseholders. There are 3 in McIntosh County, 2 in Chatham County, 3 in Glenn, and there are only 3 that are currently producing product to my knowledge. So even though we do have this industry, it still has a lot of room to grow in terms of capacity and scale. And 2 of those are in Chatham County. 1 is in Glenn. So.
And I'm from Texas, and they both legalized the same year, 2019, right?
Mm-hmm.
Texas has like, what,
38 yeah.
farms, while we have
9. Yeah, they've really invested heavily at the state level in making it a priority.
Is it,
Yeah, here we go. You go, we'll go back, yeah.
Okay, where are they leased through? The state of Georgia?
We lease through the Coastal Resources Division of the Department of Natural Resources. So they are our leaseholder. Yep.
and how, like if you were a marsh owner, how do you get in touch with someone to maybe lease areas around your marsh?
That is a great question. The way that the state does it is they predetermine based on years of water quality testing. If that's something that's interesting to you, I would encourage you to reach out to the Coastal Resources DNR division. A lot of times they base it on demand. So just an inquiry is a data point for them. But they are very, very particular about water quality because oysters are filter feeders. So you don't want to be in a creek that's on, a lot of homes. But if you own, marshland that's a little bit more undisturbed, you can petition to get a wild harvest lease there.
That would be in Brunswick, Glenn County, the natural resources.
It is, yeah, it is. And yeah, their headquarters are, yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
On your previous slide, it looked like there was a pretty dramatic decrease in the oyster harvest around 1969 or 1970. How much do we know about causes for that?
So I've actually researched it, and the typical answer is a myriad of reasons. Overharvesting, there's evidently there were, at least in the 80s, a lot of drought that caused conditions. There's been scientific research that shows that groundwater can impact their ability to stay on the mud. Like it disrupts the grip, and then the fourth reason that I've read is boat wake. Like boat wakes disrupting,
Okay.
early stages.
Yeah, it would be when they're a lot more fragile.
That leads into my question, which is how are they protected by boating, and are they strategically chosen where there's less boating in certain rivers?
Yeah. So the intertidal leases, a lot of them are tucked back. So you have a lot of non-navigable creeks and waterways, or that are at least dead ends. But in terms of like reef restoration and living shorelines are kind of a heavily regulated but somewhat easier pathway to getting into using oysters to create structure. Like if you're a homeowner and you need to replace a bulkhead, you can apply for a living shoreline as a nature-based solution instead of that more gray solution. Reef restoration's a little bit trickier. I'm still trying to understand all the permitting on it, but basically you have to have rights to put things on the water or the marsh or the mud, basically is what it is. Because on our waterways, it requires substrate. The oysters aren't just gonna set on mud. Yeah, we'll do one more and then we'll keep going.
They said that you couldn't eat their oysters anymore because of pollution.
Mm-hmm. Right. So as homes have encroached a lot of the marshland, now we have things like, the big one is fecal coliform, because roadways run off into the creeks, you have bird poop, you have human waste, all sorts of things like that end up getting into the waterway, in addition to, fertilizer. But oysters are great nitrogen cyclers. So you may not want to put them there to eat them, but we should all be pursuing ways to put them there because they do help restore the water. So, it's a nuance. I want to put an oyster reef in my backyard so that it helps rehabilitate the water. It's different than I want to put that there so I can eat it.
And then Lazaretta Creek boat ramp, their boat ramp is like failing, and so they have oyster bags there. I mean, I think they built it like a couple of years ago, and it's already eroding away. And so the city is doing it. They have to put the oyster bags there to create a little bit
so that helps create structure. All right, we can keep going from that one. Thanks. Why floating aquaculture? That's one of the things I like to talk about because it is new in the state. The number one thing really is that it creates a fantastic Georgia product while reducing pressure on wild reefs. So we've stated that they've declined. We don't want to keep harvesting from them. Policies are in place that just like when you cut down a tree, you have to plant a new one. When you harvest, you do have to replace it with culch, which is substrate that allows oysters to recruit.
What was that word again?
Culch?
Culch.
Yeah, it's basically the commercial word for substrate. Like it can be anything as defined by the as long as it fits. It can be cement, it can be wood, it can be basically anything that's hard that you put on the bank that oysters can recruit on. And they do look towards, it should be something that's okay to put in the water. So it reduces that pressure, it improves water quality. You do have higher survival and growth rates because they are encased in baskets. One of the biggest predators to small oysters are actually blue crabs because they can just pinch them. By them being in baskets, it helps protect them as they're more fragile and small. There's no reef disturbance. Georgia hasn't allowed dredging for a long time, but that's still a popular practice in some places. It creates marine habitat, very traceable, very secure. These oysters have been sitting in the water for a full week before you eat them, so they've never been sitting in the sun baking. What are my last ones here? Coastal economies. We have at Tybee Oyster, we have 4 employees effectively now. So, sometimes that's really exciting to me to go, okay, we've created 4 jobs, even if we've done nothing else. Like that's in a working waterfront environment. Because believe me, starting a small business, you need to give yourself the small wins sometimes. And then, it complements the reef restoration, similar point to the reducing the pressure really. So at Tybee Oyster, as we incorporated and really thought about why we were getting into this, we leaned on a lot of different things and keywords. We wanted our oysters to be sustainable. And as we've learned and grown, we're leaning even more towards the regenerative side of that. How can we make this beyond sustainable? We want our oysters to be bespoke. They're hand-touched. They're small team. They're small batch crafted, if you will. And community is really important. Things like this, we say yes, we come out, we talk about it because it's part of our mission and we think it's important. And then increasing the awareness of ecological benefits. So as I thought about this, and we talk about it a lot on our team, it's really about leveraging your place, finding your passion, and helping people find purpose. And so that really is what segued us into the nonprofit. So we started going into classrooms and talking to students about, how can the oyster serve as an inspiration to you? This tiny thing looks like a rock, filters 50 gallons of water, a day, builds habitat, creates community in its own habitat. So that's really the impetus for it, an empowerment tool, really. And with that, I'll turn it over to Anna because she's doing, take the microphone.
So our mission, so our mission, I'll just read it. ECO empowers students in communities through place-based education rooted in programming about oysters. By connecting learners with oyster farmers, scientists, and maritime professionals, we foster environmental stewardship, workforce pathways, and long-term investments in Georgia coastal ecosystem. So I think it was a statistic that came out about like students and where they're from, and if they end up back in the same town, it was like 80%. 80% of people end up within 100 miles of where they came from. And so place-based learning is all rooted in that, learning about your place. I mean, you can learn about the coral reefs and learn about different things and your impact on them, but it's like what's in your backyard, where can you make a difference in? So a lot of these students that we get to interact with and touch within Savannah, they haven't necessarily even been on the salt marsh or really know what an oyster is. Maybe they've had an oyster roast or something like that, but understand this is like 30 minutes down the road from them, or not even, just when they cross the road over the bridge. So we get to partner with educators. So we have a lot of really cool, passionate educators. So we get to teach them and empower them to teach the students, because if your educators are passionate, it's gonna get the students excited. No, you're good. We can keep going. So how do we do that? So how do the oysters do that? Because we just teach about the oysters. So we teach about their economy. As Laura mentioned, the history of oysters in Georgia is really rich and deep. I think tomorrow it is. We have a school we're partnering with, Virginia Herd, through the same Berkeley Hannon Foundation. They're going to go to Pinpoint Heritage Museum, and then they're going to go bag shell, oyster shell, that's going to eventually go back on the shoreline. And we had some students come up, or one student in particular, she's like, I told my mom we're going to Pinpoint Heritage Museum, and she said, oh, your grandfather was a really important member there, and, you know, make sure to look, his name is on a plaque somewhere, you know. And that little girl was like super excited to learn about her grandfather's history and where she comes from, and his role in the working waterfront, whether it's crabbing or oystering. So that's a really cool example of it. And they're exposed to boat captains, exposed to oyster farmers, exposed to scientists, all in their backyard, ways that they can work there. Their ecology. So oysters are very, very important organisms that are alive. They have a heartbeat. And so we get to teach students about these animals, even though they look like rocks.
Oysters have a heartbeat?
Yes. I should have put the video on there. I know. Yeah, so part of what we do is use it as like the second or third session. We'll do an oyster dissection, learn about their anatomy and their adaptations. And that's always the last part. You have to be really careful with the oyster, and then you can see their heartbeat. They don't have any nervous systems, so they don't feel pain, as the kids always ask. But you can see that heart beating, which usually deters them from wanting to eat a raw oyster. So these little tiny organisms that have a heart, even the ones that we saw in those previous images, the small ones, as Laura said, they filter water continually. So they're just sitting there eating and cleaning our waters. They create habitat. So about 300 species of organisms rely either on oysters or inside of oysters or around oysters for their habitat, and for climate resilience. So they help sequester that carbon and the nitrogen cycle as well. And it really connects them with their identity, as I said, with that example of the little girl, where she comes from. We took a survey of these students before our partnership, like if they connect to the Georgia coastline, and herds 30 minutes maybe from the coast. And a lot of students really didn't connect with the coastline or called Georgia coast their home. They didn't really understand what that means either. So our goal is to...
It has a tidal creek that runs through it.
Mm-hmm.
So they were able to compare the water quality, things like salinity and turbidity there with when they went out to the farm.
Yeah.
To see the difference.
Yeah. So it's a really cool way we're able to, if they are not able to go to the coastline, bring the coastline into the classroom. So with all of this, it has a huge impact on what they'll care about as adults. Hopefully, in some way they'll either, maybe not pollute, or, maybe they'll go in a career, maybe they'll be an oyster farmer, whatever it is, at least they'll stick with that. I mean, it's pretty hard to forget about an oyster's heartbeat.
You said something that I missed.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're talking about carbon sequestration,
Mm-hmm.
and then you said
Nitrogen. So their role in the nitrogen cycle.
You said something resilience.
Maybe it was the coastal resilience as a whole. Yeah, it was probably coastal resilience as a whole. They're huge in the nitrogen cycle. They sequester the nitrogen that's just like floating around, whether it's through runoff, that usually will cause the algal blooms. They'll wrap it up in the pseudofeces and deposit it out. They don't want to eat it, but they deposit it out and it'll sink to the bottom, and then other little microbes can make that nitrogen into more usable form. So it helps against that, which is really fascinating. Yeah, yeah. So as y'all all most likely know, the Georgia coast is very unique. The high tides in the marsh create that habitat. The oysters have to be pretty resilient, and all the organisms around it to withstand the tides that drop, for a 6-hour day, come back up and stuff like that. And a lot of the students too don't really realize that when I say like 6 feet high and then we're standing in the creek all the way down. So very unique. We do have really strong protection laws, as the Coastal Marshland Protection Act allowed us to have such a beautiful, pristine coastline and have such clean waters. And we want to continue that road. There's a lot of states, like in the Upper East Coast, like New York Harbor, that they're using oysters to restore their waters. Like they're getting a lot of funding so that oysters can clean their waters, filter their water, so they can have better water. But thankfully, we do have clean waters, but we want to continue to have that. We don't want to get down to that level to where we're like,
So
oh no.
Anybody knows how to get federal funding for prevention?
Not, yes. Yes, exactly.
Let me know.
Yeah, exactly.
To continue to protect our coast instead of waiting until it's in
A problem.
Yeah.
They're getting,
I was going to say, up in Chesapeake, I grew up in
Yeah.
Maryland, they have grants that they give people.
The Chesapeake Bay area, it's paying farmers, oyster farmers, for their nitrogen cycling. You see the credit market for it. But that's because they were out of compliance with the EPA's Clean Water Act. So they had to get it back. Versus now, we're great. Our estuary is healthy. So there's not.
If the estuary is healthy, then why can't we keep the existing oyster?
Fair question. Yeah. Is it healthy? What's the definition of healthy? Who defines that? Who attaches money to whether it's healthy or not? Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. In the growing aquaculture, the students are able to learn about this aquaculture, and so we're able to use this as a tool to grow oysters and to teach them about, the difference between wild oysters and farmed oysters, and they're able to go out to the farm and see that as well. And our Georgia coast is really small, but we're strong, and we can hope to continue to keep that legacy going on, because the kids are the ones who are going to be in charge in the future. So how do we do this? I kind of mentioned it briefly. Usually it either starts with outreach or teacher workshops. So we do a lot of outreach events. Gray's Reef recently had their opening, then Shorebird Festival on Tybee Island, so different things like that. We went to the Georgia Aquarium, which if anyone has connections there, I think it'd be so cool to have an exhibit about Georgia coast there, because there's not really anything about Georgia there. We're like teaching about oysters, and they're like, we have mussels over here. I'm like, you can use that. So we do a lot of outreach, which usually connects us to different organizations or teachers. And then it usually really starts with the teachers. If you have a really passionate teacher and who's willing, and even if they don't have the support, and they want to bring it into into their classroom. So we get to take them out to the farm. They'll do like a 4-hour day out on the farm, some like dockside activities, get some hands-on work, brainstorm about ideas of how they can connect curriculum, oysters in their curriculum, whether it's art or science or math or economy.
We have a class we partner with, and we do their blue economy unit, so we help them design an ocean-based business.
Yeah. So it really starts with the teachers, and then with that, then we do the classroom visits. So we partner with schools to do. We don't want to just do like one-off visits, which we do, but we want to do like a deep learning. So usually they'll have a question what they're studying, like why are oysters keystone species or something like that. And then we'll do different units talking about that, talking about their anatomy, talking about their filter feeders. They'll do water quality testing, different things. They'll look at the basket. So whatever the teacher really wants. We're going to go to Savannah Arts next week and do their AP Environmental Science class. They have a whole unit, I think, in their AP Environmental Science class about aquaculture, but they just kind of breeze past it. So we're able to partner with teachers to kind of give them some different resources. We have the FLUPSI, which really makes it an affordable option. Our biggest barrier is transportation. Obviously, boats are not the most inexpensive item, and we want to make sure that every student can get out there. So whether it's scholarships or either we'll fund it, we want the students go out to the farm. But if there's an organization or school that cannot afford that, and if we don't have a grant, then we're able to see the FLUPSI. Well, they're also able to see it if they go on the boat, but that's where we can see the oysters on the dock side. So students are able to come and see the baby oysters and see the system in which they grow.
And I'll give a plug for the Savannah Boathouse here. They are fantastic partners. They let us bring like 100 kids to their working dock and see the oysters on their shoreline, look in this, lay over the dock to do water quality testing, and then let us meet upstairs in their space.
Yeah.
So it's a big ask for them, and they're always great about it.
Yeah, with working waterfront too. I mean, a lot of it's private homes, private docks, so having this it allows it to be a lot more accessible. Farm field trips, as I said, usually it goes in conjunction or either one, and they'll go out and see the farm. Usually this is done after they've already learned about why are oysters important, what is water quality, why is that important, what is aquaculture. Aquaculture is agriculture, and a lot of students don't know what agriculture is, so then you have to break down, like, what is a farmer, where do you get your food from? And so learning that this is agriculture. So they get to go out, they look at dolphins and birds. And then this is usually their culminating stuff as well. We partner with Shell to Shore, a nonprofit based in Athens, Georgia, that collects and recycles oyster shell from restaurants. So instead of it going to the landfill, they gather it. And then as well as University of Georgia on Skidaway, they have the shell recycling program there as well. So those are all mounds of oyster shell. So the kids just shovel oyster shell into bags, and they really like it. Here's some more images of our programming, oyster dissection, and then.
It's actually an aquaculture class from UGA.
Oh, there you go.
Trip. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. And then which one is this?
It's the life cycle, and this middle one is the aquaculture class.
Oh, got it.
This one is
Life cycle that a student drew.
A lot of our activities are kind of anchored in the line of thinking of STEAM, and so can you use art to help learn and deepen your understanding of something? So a lot of them will draw things we're talking about. We encourage them to bring a notebook. Some schools use their iPads. So. Yeah,
their STEAM journal is really cool. They can take data throughout it. They can measure the water quality at the creek, and then when they go out to the farm, they can continue that. And that's pretty much it. So if you have any questions, we do have, if you want to join our newsletter, you can scan that QR code. We only send like a few a year, so you won't get spam.
Does anyone remember how many jobs they have?
Yeah, maybe like 3 more this year. And then we do have we have a murder mystery dinner tomorrow night. I think that there's maybe 1 ticket left. But we do have an auction as well, which is open to everyone. And so, if y'all are wanting to look at any items as well, we have our auction there, or our Instagram.
How long will the auction be for?
It'll close tomorrow night.
Yeah.
I will get a follow-up email when it happens.
Yeah.
I know, yeah. Well,
would have shared it.
I know.
It took us a minute to get it all up.
Yeah, slow rolling, but.
We'll go front to back.
I was just wondering if y'all designed your baskets or if you got them from somewhere else.
Yeah, the baskets are part of a system called Flip Farm. So what you're seeing here is actually what we call the drying position. Normally they sit with the water line right here, and then once a week we do flip them to desiccate or dry out all the things that are growing on it, because if you've ever seen the bottom of a dock here, it gets covered up pretty quickly. So that one day in the sun allows us to keep as good a maintenance as possible as we can on the baskets to protect the water flow. But yeah, it's a system invented by a guy in New Zealand. It's going on like 12 years old. So this is actually like the 4th generation. He's still a somewhat small business and continue to iterate, but it is one of the only systems that you can work while staying in the boat. So a lot of the other systems you actually physically get out and flip the baskets. And I always say, I don't know if you've noticed, but Perry and I are not 20, and do not want something that we cannot operate by ourselves because we weren't sure what this was going to look like, and wanted it to be efficient, especially with 2 engineers. We were really excited about this system, and then as we continue to learn more about it, it is a workforce multiplier, and it allows us to have a diverse team. Like, you don't have to be young and burly to do this, which is nice. So, like, my mom's come out and worked on the farm. She loves it. You drive your boat tie the equipment up to your boat and drive it along the lines, and it's a lot more ergonomic.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is actually a picture of our harvesting equipment. So they go up on a ramp and then they pump open. I didn't really put a working slide in here. Yeah.
do we have any kind of like metric for like what oyster density would have been like pre-extraction? I guess the industry we got off the last 150 years, and how do you think that's the population, declined dramatically after, widespread extraction occurred? And I guess like, how do you think the landscape has been altered maybe by that? Is there any way to know?
I think there is a good way to know, and I think one of the best ways to do that is to rely on the local people. We haven't always had scientists tracking the data, things like that. Perry, do you want to chime in at all? The question is, how has the landscape changed over the years of oysters on the reefs? Perry grew up on Tybee, so his family's kind of watched it for a long time.
Yeah, and I think I could only speak anecdotally.
Yeah.
I don't know about any hard science.
Yeah. But, it has, you really give 110% for the online viewers, and I'm proud of you for that. We have the data that shows how many were harvested, and then you can presume the decline is from either decimation or lack of interest, but I don't have the data to really say.
Yeah, and I didn't know if that in any way impacted coastal erosion.
It definitely impacts coastal erosion. So it is known that oyster banks help protect the marsh from eroding. It helps, hold it back in. And you can see in places, if you're out in a boat where there are no oysters, the marsh grass will kind of topple over. Now, barrier islands are going to shift anyway, but the oysters do help provide that structure.
Right, apart the wave energy.
Mm-hmm.
My other question is, does your brood stock spawn with wild oysters? Do they have a synchronized spawn, or is it just sort of like whenever that?
The spawn is based on the water temperature. So just like any other animal, there's variability, but basically as the water starts to warm up, that's their cue that they start to spawn. And they do spawn starting in kind of late April, early May, all the way through even late October. It's just not as, there's a peak, that is kind of in the springtime.
Do they scatter everything, or do they have
So the oysters release sperm and egg into the water, and then those join up. And then their larvae, they're floating. And then once they go to release their foot, they look for a place to set. They only set once, and that's when they are called spat. Mm-hmm. So when we purchase ours as spat, they have attached a pulverized oyster shell already. So that's why they are singles, the ones that we grow in the baskets. Yeah. So they go through a spawning cycle in a hatchery using raw water, not raw, they sterilize it, but natural water from the Skidaway here in Savannah. They go through that spawning cycle.
Like a land-based facility?
They do. Yeah, the water comes up through their land-based facility. They do it all in tanks. And they have a pulverized shell that the oyster sets on. And then that way it's attached once. They can still grow together just like trees. They're individual, but they're sitting next to each other. So that is one of the benefits of our baskets being in that high energy zone. They get a lot of activity, so it keeps them from just sitting next to each other in the baskets.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this, the inside of it, yeah, so
There's
this
your
was
life cycle.
before we had the flux seed, we had the baby oysters in these mesh bags, but then we got the flux seed, so we no longer use the mesh bags anymore.
Mm-hmm.
This is just for education purposes to show they aren't, they're also not this clean either. But when we had the mesh bags, it's such fine mesh, and so that was one of the tasks when we had seed, and then we've had to clean it.
We've held on to them in case it breaks, but we have. Yeah, it's nice to not have to.
So you're attached to your containers there? They're already attached?
Exactly, they're already attached, so they're loose. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do the tiny salt bombs ever release spawn out there on those farms and then mingle with regular Tybee, or is those long, crazy?
They could, ours can go through a spawning cycle, and so then that would just all get released into the water the same way. But they are, the kids of the pointy wild oysters. It's an adaptation that they look differently from the way they're grown. Exact same oysters, just the brood stock that they use at UGA, they harvest from wild reefs, and then they look for a couple of different traits. They look for a lot of times ones that are high up and seem to be thriving, so they know they can withstand a long time out of the water in case we end up in a dire circumstance or the heat, things like that. They also look for rakes that they have had a known disease outbreak and get the survivors. So we end up with a more hardy oyster. So, yeah. Did you have a question on this row? No. Okay.
I have a different question.
Okay.
It's edible part.
Okay.
Where is the heart on the oyster?
Do we have that?
Well,
We've got that little diagram here. Let's go to, maybe you can see it in, no. Can you see it in this one? It's like, isn't it right under the adductor muscle?
yes, you have the adductor muscle, which is the chewiest bit of the oyster that holds the two shells together, and there's the pericardial cavity, the little cavity below the adductor muscle, and it's like really
Towards the hinge, like the pointy part. Yeah.
Eating a raw oyster, you're eating the heart.
Yeah, I know.
I know.
I
We're
know.
going to see a drop in sales. Yeah.
Kids don't want to do it.
So what determines the shape of the oyster? Some of the big fat ones, some of the long skinny ones? Is it geography or?
Yeah, I mean, they adapt to their environment. So in the Georgia coast, they are those like long, sometimes with a fluted edge, and then you go up to Maine and they're more like gnarly or rocky, or we were just in the Pacific Northwest and they're a different species, but they are wild and crazy looking, just craggy. So that can be age. And just like humans, I mean, they are an animal. So you have some that just don't get as big. And then there's also, various things we can control on the farm, like stocking density, tumbling, our husbandry practices that can help create a shape. One of the things you get from this growing system is a nice deep cup and kind of a nice round edge. So it holds the brine. It's easy to shuck. They move a lot more than wild oysters do. So they have a thicker shell. They've built that up. Kind of through adversity, they've, thickened their skin, if you will, and it makes them easier to shuck. So, it is definitely something that has been engineered to support the oyster's own engineering, which is really cool. Yeah.
How about the cluster oysters? I went to one in Georgia Conservancy
Mm-hmm.
one every year, and they have you just keep eating around it. You get
Yeah.
the main one, and you get all these little oysters.
So the number one thing floating baby larval oyster likes to attach to are other oysters. And that's how they cluster like that. Yeah, and oftentimes on our muddy banks, that's the only thing they find that's hard to attach to. And so it does create that cluster. And that's the difference between a wild grown or a farmed oyster. The other terminology there is we call ours put and take. So we put it in and we take it out versus wild, like that's kind of just taking. But in a way, it is also put and take because we would put the culch there, and give them something to grow on. But just kind of a different nuance in the two different types of growing.
And the wild oysters are all like growing next to each other, competing for space. So they grow long and skinny upwards versus whenever they're like, if we stock these properly, then they're going to be able to grow a little bit more out.
Yeah, they're not competing with each other. So if you have, 4 in the same row and water's coming this way, the one that starts to go up and can capture everything ends up growing faster.
Do you have many restaurants that help the recycling, like collecting?
Yeah, we don't actually administer the recycling ourselves. Shell to Shore does that, but we definitely advocate for any of the restaurants that serve our oysters to partner with them. And I think we're at about 15 restaurants in Savannah that I know for sure are recycling, and they're definitely working on growing that program. So.
Is there any difference in the taste between the farm and the wild?
A little bit, yeah. There are. I think a lot of it just has to do with, them being in the water more. The wild ones are sitting up in the marsh, so they get different sediment and different flavor profiles coming through. I think we just actually did this taste test the other day. It's a little bit more like minerally, and you can just, I don't know how to articulate it other than you can kind of just taste that it was sitting closer to the marsh grass. Yeah. It wasn't particularly more muddy. I mean, we cleaned it and everything, but it just kind of had more of that like earthy, yeah. So, yeah.
So historically, supposed to consume oysters with lots of cars in it.
Mm-hmm.
So because you're a farm, can you consume your oysters year round?
Mm-hmm.
I say Perry.
We're just thinking over. It is, so the thing with the R months is, I know. No. The thing with R months is, if you'll notice, the ones that don't have an R are the warmer weather months. So you go March, April, and then you hit May, June, July, August, which, as you know, are really hot here. So our wild population oysters sit up, oftentimes, you know, getting a lot of sun baking down on them. When an oyster doesn't have water around it, it locks tight. So whatever bacteria was in it is in it. And then it's been warmed up. Yeah, so it can, you know, kind of like a petri dish, it can continue to harbor that. So that's why the regulations even exist to say, is not only a wives' tale, but that's why there are actually regulations that you cannot eat a wild oyster during those 4 months. As of last year, you can eat our farmed oysters. You had been able to in South Carolina for, I think, 8 or 10 years, but they just wrote the regulations last summer. So last summer was our first year of sales. They are a little bit more strict. The joke is that the R now stands for regulations and refrigeration. So they stay submerged for 2 weeks in the summer before we harvest them. So we haven't flipped them, none of that. They stay in the water, so you know that everything's filtered out. And then we have from sunup to 10 a.m. to harvest, and then they have to be in that walk-in at 10 a.m., and we have 2 hours to get them down to temperature. If none of those wickets are met, they go back out to the farm. The beautiful thing about oyster farming, or one of them, is you can restock them. So it's not like we have to throw all that away, but it is, you know, an expensive wasted time. So, so we did it every week last summer.
And they usually are like the water temperature when we pull them in. And then
Yeah.
they get below 50 degrees.
Yeah, and we have to temp them. So yeah.
What are your teacher programs offered, and is there a charge for those?
We have not charged teachers for the programming. That is something we try to use sponsorships for and have them come out and just be able to experience it. We try to do one quarterly. We have run into some boat logistics, so we haven't scheduled ours for this year yet, but we do post them, and Anna sends them out in our newsletter.
Yeah, if you do the newsletter or on our website, if you do the newsletter, you'll be able to get it, or our website, you can put an inquiry form and put you on our list, or talk to me after, or if you know a teacher. It's a good way. Yeah.
Me, I love it. Yeah.
Well, this is sort of a different question. You had a slide up there with graphics,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the graphics, to me, almost looks like
We'll get these.
yes,
Okay.
it almost looks like it has horns.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just curious, what's your sort of how did that start? And you have some wonderful graphics up there.
Oh,
It's
thank
very
you.
engaging. So can you share a little about that?
Yeah, so the logo is actually a map of the creeks. This is the farm right here. This is the Bull River. And, you know, as we were playing with the concept of the business, you know, we've got ropes everywhere. We're going to be on boats like in the water. And the river's called the Bull River. And we were like, well, yeah, they're animals. So we're like, we're actually ranchers. So this is our steed. Yeah, it is a bull. Yeah. So yeah, and then the ECO was, you know, obviously an oyster shell, and then, you know, just the community and the students kind of was the. Thank you. Yeah.
Again, you told us how long before, but how long is it from the spat to when it's ready?
So from the time it's actually spat till we get it, it's about 6 weeks-ish. And then from the time we get it at 2 millimeters, 12 to 15 months is,
Like
average.
last year we were selling oysters that were like 8 months, and they were already like market size. So just like kids and
Yeah.
people, you know, you have some students that year. Just depends on how fast they
It
grow.
lasts longer, but I guess that's an ideal size for restaurants.
Yeah, we talk. Well, two of our team members are chefs, which is great. Our farm manager, Chino, he was actually the executive chef at Husk before he joined our team, and so he offers great voice and perspective to us. He and he has great relationships with a lot of the chefs in Savannah. So we do look and listen to the feedback and try to get something that's kind of a middle ground size. But it also depends on what we're growing. I mean, it is a farm, so like right now the oysters are kind of on the small side because the water's been really cold. So they aren't growing a lot. So we just maintain good communication and set expectations and try to address it that way.
Which is 2 inches.
Yeah.
in Georgia. So there's a legal service. Yeah, it has to be at least 2
Mhm.
inches.
For farmed, and then wild is 3 because they do want to make sure they've gone through a spawn cycle.
Can I ask a completely different question?
Always, yeah.
This is fascinating to me that you all talked at the beginning about keeping the waterways clean and the environment and what have you. So what is your opinion on water waste treatment plants that pump fresh water into our salt marshes? Do you have not a whole ecological thing,
Yeah.
just one sentence or two about that?
I am usually someone who can very easily see every side. So I think in one way I say, you know, we have a ton of volume of water coming through. But I will also gladly rely on organizations like the River Keepers to test water and hold wastewater plants accountable to make sure that they're not violating any standards. So my personal opinion is, you know, let's let humans make progress, but let's also stay in balance. Even err on the side of letting the environment win a little bit because it needs to. So, yeah.
Just a note, in a tour of
Jamestown?
in Virginia,
Mhm.
Jamestown, Virginia, they said that when the English came in the beginning, the oysters were the side of dish.
Yeah. We've heard that, yeah. And, you know, I mean, we've seen old oyster shells. Mike Neal, who's one of the boat captains that we partner with to take people out, he's got some crazy oyster artifacts that are massive, yeah. So they definitely can grow to big sizes, yeah.
They were allowed to grow because
Right,
there were
yeah,
people
yeah,
consuming
yeah.
them at the same.
Yeah, I mean, we've severely encroached. Right. Yeah, it could be servingware. So we actually, one of our auction items is an oyster plate that's made out of pottery, but it's made to look like one of those big oyster shells. Yeah, so she's got a couple of different pottery pieces that all are giant, but they look like wild oysters. So it's kind of cool, even like little barnacles. And yeah, so it's fun. Yeah. No, I would not want to eat that. I'll be honest, but it's a very sustainable form of protein. So yeah.
Well, I want to thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Your lecture was very interesting and educational. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for having us.